I'm looking at all these faces, and the first thing I realize is how old I am. Um, so it occurred to me getting ready for this talk that I've been a clinical psychologist for 50 years now. So I've seen a little bit of the history of psychology, and the whole idea of studying mental health, psychology, behavioral health started in the 1880s. And for the first 120 years, all we did was we look what it meant to be sick, you know. So we have a book called The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's about this thick, and it lists hundreds of things that can go wrong with you. You know, you can have a neurosis, you can have a psychosis, you can have a character disorder, you can have an intellectual disability. So when you look at psychology up until about the year 2000, we were only concerned with these are all the things that can go wrong with you. And then if nothing goes wrong with you, then you're normal, right? So, as if there is anyone with nothing wrong with them. But nobody was looking at the question of, is there anything better than just being normal? I mean, what does it mean to really live a really good life? And around the year 2000, the head of the American Psychological Association, a man by the name of Martin Seligman, started a new school of psychology he called positive psychology, which is the study of what does it mean to live well. And the first thing that Seligman did was realize that there isn't a lot of research on it in Western psychology. So he went back to look at the ancients, to Aristotle and the Buddha and Confucius, to see what they thought about what it meant to live well. And the interesting thing is they all had an idea of what it meant not just to live well, but to live a superior kind of life, a life that was better than normal, better than better. And they all had their own names for this kind of person who lived a life that was truly exemplary and superior. So the Buddha called that kind of person a bodhisattva or an arhat, somebody who was enlightened. And Confucius called this kind of person a junzi, someone who was it means a gentleman, it means son of a lord, but it meant someone who was truly cultivated and ethical and wise. And Aristotle called this kind of person a phronimos. It comes from the word phronesis, which is a word I'll explain later on, but it means practical judgment, somebody who shows good judgment in everything they do and therefore is happy. Um, so, so we want to talk today about what it means to live a good life. And everybody has their own idea of what it means to be a good life. When I called my book Virtue, Wisdom, and Pluralism, what it meant by pluralism is that we all have our own definitions and ideas about what a good life might be. So for some of us, if we can just earn a good living and keep a roof over our heads and feed our family, and our children grow up and become decent human beings, okay, and whatever marital or love or friendships, relations we have stay intact over time, we say, okay, I've done a good job. This has been a good life. But for other people, they have to excel in something. They have to excel on the athletic field or on the ballroom floor, or they have to excel in science, or they have to create great art. They have the feeling that they have to accomplish something great in order to be worthwhile. And now we're living in an era where it looks like making a lot of money is the hallmark of a good life for a lot of people. You know, whoever dies with the most toys wins, so to speak. And it's kind of remarkable. We seem to be, with the inauguration coming up next week, we seem to be stepping into what I would call an era of impunity, where the wealthy and the powerful can do whatever they like. It used to be that we didn't think it was that way. We knew that oligarchs and the wealthy were more powerful than us and had a lot more control. The Rockefellers and the Carnegies and people like that in the old days, back in the 1880s, they had a lot of power. But we also believed that there were what we call countervailing forces. There were labor unions, there were environmental groups, there were consumer groups, citizens organizations, government regulations, things that would at least hem these oligarchs in and limit the amount of power that they had. And we seem to be entering a new era now where there are no limits, where if you're wealthy and strong enough, you can do whatever you please. We're entering a new era of great deal of corruption, where political money corrupts the entire process. And we're entering that in the world, in the international order too, where now someone like a Putin or a Xi or Trump can invade Greenland or invade Ukraine or invade Taiwan, and who's gonna stop them, you know? So we're living in this new era, and I think the question of what it means to live a good life, be an ethical person, have some positive effect on your community, I think these are more important questions than ever. So I want to go back to this idea of what does it mean to be a good life? And the first person to ever look at this question was the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who lived before Christ. And Aristotle said, what we really want in life is some kind of happiness. Okay. I mean, some people want power, and some people want money, and some people want attractive sexual partners. But the reason they want this is they think it's going to make them happy. What they want in the end is some kind of happiness. But being happy is not just what we want. And there was a philosopher by the name of Robert Nozick who did this little thought experiment. He said, imagine that we had a happiness machine. We could put these electrodes in your head, or we could inject a drug into your veins, and you would be happy no matter what. You wouldn't have to work, you wouldn't have to have any friends, you wouldn't have to go to any concerts or anything. You just lie in bed and you'd be very happy. And you could be thrown out of your job, or your house could be repossessed, or your child could be kidnapped, or your dog could be run over by a car, and you'd still be happy. You'd be happy all the time. And if you ask people, is that what you'd like? Is that what you want, just to be happy all the time? Most people would say, no, I want something different than that. I want my life to have meaning and purpose. I want that happiness to come from real things in the real world and not just be there as a feeling. So Aristotle makes it clear at any rate but what he means by happiness is more than just a lot of good positive feelings. He means that at the end of your life, you can look back on it and say, yeah, I really approve of this life I lived. Okay, I think it made the world better. I think I helped everyone that I came across. When people come to your funeral, you want them to be able to say good things about you and how you positively impacted their life and really mean it. I mean, that's what we really want in a life is some kind of positive life like that, not just happiness. But I'm going to use the word that Aristotle used, because there was no word for happiness in Greece at that time. The word he used was a 50-cent word called eudaimonia. The word the first syllable you means good, and daimonia means you have a good demon inside you, a good spirit inside you that makes you happy. But we translate that word now in English as flourishing, that my life is a flourishing life, in some way. So the first thing I want to say is, what do we mean by a flourishing life? And I've been looking at other people's definitions over the last 1,000 years or so, and it seems to me that there are 7 areas where we can flourish in our lives, 7 areas, domains, or realms that are important to us. And for me, the first one is relationships. We want to be embedded in a set of relationships, family, friends, coworkers, and so forth, where we feel we are appreciated, and we feel other people care about us, and we love these people and care about them in turn. That being nested into that caring group of relationships is probably the most important thing for people. I'm remembering my Uncle Aaron, who I was talking to when he was about 92 years of age. And he says, Seth, he says, everybody I knew is gone. My wife is dead. My brothers and sisters are dead. My parents and grandparents are dead. The guys I went to high school with, they're all gone. He says, I've outlived them all. And he says, I don't have any reason to go on living. He says, I'm not depressed or anything, but if I died tomorrow, it would be fine with me. It's these relationships that really keep us going. And so I think that's a very important thing. Second is a sense of accomplishment in life. And this doesn't mean that you've made $1 million, you got a great job, because what's important is what's important to you. Were you able to accomplish what was important to you in life? And it may be what's important to you is, I don't know, being able to do a crossword puzzle today, learning a new level in a video game, doing some knitting or gardening and creating something beautiful. But we all have little tasks that we do, learning a new recipe. We all have little tasks that we master every day. And each task that we master gives us a sense of efficacy in the world, that we have some power to do something in the world. And you see this in little babies when they're growing up, when they're first learning to walk, when they're first learning to skip and jump and hop and tumble, and the great joy that this gives kids every time you master some new skill. And then it turns to learning your alphabet and learning how to tie your shoes and so forth. But we're always learning new skills, and they increase our power to be effective agents in the world. And we have a sense that we have some control over our lives when we master these skills. So some level of accomplishment in our life is going to be important. And the third area is what I call aesthetics, the beautiful, that we want things in our life that are beautiful. We want to have beautiful clothing. We want to live in houses that are pleasant to live in, look attractive. We like to look at sunsets and go to the beach and watch the waves. We like to watch rainbows. We like flowers. I mean, we all want to see and smell and taste and touch beautiful things in our lives. And if we have some creative spirit within us, and most of us do, we want to be able to create some kind of beauty. We want to be able to learn to play a musical instrument, or sing along with a chorus, or learn to dance with other people, or whatever learning how to knit, anything that creates some object of beauty. We all have something that we do, or most of us do, where creating some beauty or appreciating beauty becomes an important part of our lives. Going to concerts, going to museums, going to botanical gardens, all these sorts of things enrich our lives in a whole variety of ways. So we have relationship, accomplishment, and aesthetics. My fourth area is meaning. We want to have some sense that our lives have meaning. And for most of us, that means that the people around us are glad we're here, that we contributed something to the quality of their lives. I think of that old Jimmy Stewart movie, It's a Wonderful Life, where he gets to see what would have happened in his town if he'd never lived. And he gets to appreciate his life in a new way afterwards. Sometimes we get meaning from other things. I mean, scientists get meaning from making new discoveries. Artists get meaning from creating new art. Other people get meaning from helping their communities, from tutoring, for example, and making a difference to the place where they live. Other people get meaning from a cause they belong to, that they're furthering, or a religion that they belong to, or even meaning just from being in nature. But we all want our lives to feel meaningful. We don't want them to feel meaningless, which is like the worst thing that can happen. Okay, fifth area is the one that I call being wholehearted. We want to be fully present and fully here. This is something that I get from Zen more than anywhere else. I certainly wasn't this way before my 30 years of Zen practice, but it's practice on putting your full attention on what you're doing and being fully present with it and caring about it in a heartfelt way. It means when problems come up that you confront them and face them in a forward-facing way. You're not passive-aggressive and shying away from it or afraid to do them. You go ahead and you're involved in whatever is happening. If you're playing with your kids, you're not there fiddling with your phone while you're playing with the kids. You're actually paying attention to your kids. When you're chopping carrots for a meal, you're not there mindlessly thinking about something else when you're chopping carrots. You're there paying attention to the actual physical movement of chopping the carrots. When you're eating breakfast in the morning, you're actually tasting the breakfast. You're not listening to the news and not noticing what you're eating at all. When you're in the shower, you're feeling the water against your body, and you're not there wondering, did I already shampoo already or not? Do I have to do it again? Because you're there thinking about what you're going to tell your boss, when you got to work that day. Whatever you're doing, you want to be fully involved, fully present. And the more you can do that in your life, the richer your life feels. Okay, my sixth area is an area what I call integration. We have people who have different parts of themselves, and when they're in different situations, they live different lives. Okay, we know about parents, for example, who in the community are like pillars of the community and very well respected, but behind closed doors in their home, they're abusing their wives and abusing their children and mean and nasty and so forth. Or you have, there are all kinds of ways in which people can compartmentalize their lives and be one kind of way with some people and a different kind of way with other people. But I think that if we have values that are really important to us, we ought to express them in every area of our lives, not just in some areas. We shouldn't compartmentalize our lives, but we should be whole and integrated. And the last area that I think is important for living a good life is the capacity for acceptance, because we all come across difficulties in lives. I think about my own life. My first wife passed away. I've been diagnosed with all kinds of illnesses, cancer, and this, that, and the other thing. There are times I've applied for jobs that I want to get and didn't get them and was turned down. There was a time when my daughter, who's doing just great right now, when she was 13, when she was hell on wheels, to take care of her, and there was screaming and yelling in the household every day because she wanted her total absolute freedom at that age, and I still thought I had to exercise some responsibility about what she did and didn't do. So everyone has lives that are hard in a whole variety of ways, and nobody has a life that goes well in every single way. But we have to be able, when bad things happen, to move on somehow. Okay, this has happened. I acknowledge it. I hurt. I mourn. I grieve. And then you don't want to get stuck there. You want to be able to say, there is something else to look forward to in the future, and be able to move on to it in some kind of way. And having been a psychotherapist for a long time, I've certainly seen people get stuck. For example, I remember a woman whose son was on life support, and the doctors told her that he was now brain dead, as he had flatlined on the EEG, and the doctors advised her to kind of, terminate his life at that point. He was in his 20s. And she consulted with the family, and they all agreed, yes, the doctor's right, there's no hope anymore. And she allowed them to disconnect her child from the machine. And then she felt like she'd done something terribly wrong. And she decided, I would have rather have had my son come home a vegetable, and I bathe him and take care of him for the rest of his life. That's what I should have done. And she could not move on. She even went to the extent of going to the graveyard and trying to dig her son's body up so she could bring it home. I mean, that's an example of getting stuck and not being able to move on again, the kind of a pathological grieving. And we don't want to do that. We want to be able to acknowledge the hurt that occurs because it's real. We want to be able to respond to it, but we don't want to stop growing because of it. So these are the kinds of lives I'm talking about: relationships, accomplishments, appreciation of beauty, meaning, wholeness, integration, acceptance. And the question is, how do we build lives like that? What does it take to build lives like that? And if I turn to the sages of old, if I look at Aristotle, I look at the Buddha, and I look at Confucius, they all seem to say the exact same thing, which is pretty remarkable, given that they lived in cultures that were totally different and had nothing to do with each other. They never heard of each other, although they lived around the same time. What they said is that good lives are lives that build what we might call virtues or character strengths, and build wisdom, and build it over the course of an entire lifetime. So you're never done with this project. And you do it through deliberate effort and attention. It doesn't happen by accident. You set your goal on practicing certain things, remembering to do these things, trying to be better at them, and so forth. And this is what it means to kind of eventually develop a life in which good things happen. So what are these character strengths, or what are these abilities that make a difference in how well you can build a positive life? I'm going to call the first of those virtues or character strengths benevolence. Okay, each of the people that I'm talking about, the Buddha and Confucius and Aristotle, called them different things. So the Buddha talked about compassion and loving kindness, and Aristotle talked about philia, or friendliness, or Confucius talked about his prime virtue was what he called in Chinese ren, which meant human-heartedness or humaneness. When the Scottish philosopher David Hume wrote his ethics book in the 1700s, he called this benevolence, and he said it includes compassion and charity and humaneness and forgiveness and all these kind of positive traits. Okay, but Confucius said that what Confucius was asked by one of his disciples, what is ren? What is this humaneness? And he just said, love people. And then they asked him, what is wisdom? And he said, know people. It was very, very simple. Confucius was a little bit, he wasn't sure whether humaneness was just a character of the humanistic heart, the open heart, or whether it was a rule, like the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But later on in the Confucian tradition, there's about 100 years or so after Confucius, there's a Chinese philosopher called Mencius. And Mencius says this is something we're all born with. He says, imagine a stranger walking through a village, and he comes up to a well, and there's a child playing on the top of the well, and the child is about to topple in and fall into the well and drown. Okay, he says, there's not a person alive who wouldn't see this and feel a sense of alarm and shock and care and want to rush to prevent that from happening. He says, and it's not because of some idea we have. like, well, if I save this child, someone may save my child in the future. It's our own beating heart that trembles at seeing this. We get the same reaction if we watch a television program and see refugees from a war zone or a tornado, or somebody steps in a puppy's paw and we hear the puppy yelp, or we hear a baby cry. We immediately want to react in a compassionate way and ease ourselves in that kind of way. So Mencius says we're all born with that. He calls it the seeds of compassion, that even as an infant, we have the seeds of compassion. But the seeds might grow or not grow depending on how they're watered. So we have to look at how they're cultivated by our parents. We have to look at how we cultivate them after we reach a certain point. So, for example, it's kind of natural as we're growing up to care about our family. Okay, we care about our mommy and our daddy and our brother and sister and our grandparents and so. But people on the other side of the world, we don't really naturally care about. We don't even think about them. And then as we grow older, we might care about people in our group, people of our age group, or people of our race, or people of our ethnicity, or people of our religion, or people of our political party. And then those other people who have a different political views or different religion or different race, we don't care about them quite as much. We care about our group first, right? And it's only later that we can learn to begin, Mencius uses the word extend, our compassion and caring universally, so that we include everyone to some degree in our caring. And I think it's a major struggle or difficulty to care about everybody the same. It's very hard to care about people you don't know in the same way you care about your own children. So that's never going to happen. But we can try to extend it as much as we can, and that can be a lifelong project. How do I include everybody under the wings of my caring? And that's the most important product for Buddhists, is how do I extend compassion, loving kindness to everybody universally? The second virtue I want to talk about is courage. And there's extreme courage, like firemen saving children from a burning building, or soldiers saving their companions by taking out a machine gun nest of the enemy and so forth. But that's not the kind of courage I'm talking about. I'm talking about the everyday kind of courage that we need just to get along in this world. We walk into situations and we wonder, am I going to be accepted? What are people going to think of me? We shy away from things that might be difficult to do. What if I fail? We are in an intimate relationship with someone and they're doing something we don't like, but we're afraid to say something because they might get angry at us. There are all the things that we hold ourselves back with due to fear. And even brave people can be, afraid of some things. Everyone's afraid of something, right? So the fireman who rushes out and saves children may be afraid to go on an airplane because he has a phobia and so on. Or a soldier who takes out the enemy machine gun nest may be afraid to disobey an order because he's afraid of being put in the brig, even if it's an illegal order. So we all have to kind of check what are the things we're afraid of that hold us back from being our full selves, really expressing ourselves, and being the kind of people we want to be in the world. And if we don't have that kind of courage, we just shrink. And the way to deal with these kinds of fears is by facing them and doing the things you're scared of anyway. So psychologists will tell you that if you're afraid of being on airplanes, for example, that the way to get over it is to have someone accompany you and go on the airplane. Well, let me take a simple example, being afraid of going in an elevator. Okay, some people have elevator phobias. They can't go into elevators. So what you're advised to do is to have someone go with you inside an elevator and stay there for a couple of hours going up and down. If you just stay there for 5 minutes, it doesn't work. But you stay there and you go into a state of panic. You're breathing hard, you're terrified. And then after a half hour or so, that fear begins to ease up and go away, and then you begin to become relaxed. So the fear begins to extinguish. And then the next day you go back and the fear comes back again. But it begins to go away in a shorter period of time. And you do this day after day after day until finally you're able to get onto an elevator. So this is the way we have to deal with all of our fears that hold us back and inhibit us and keep us from doing what we ought to be doing in our lives. We have to have the courage to go ahead and face them anyway. And we have to have the courage too to stand up for our friends and neighbors. If you see that at work a coworker is being mistreated, for example, if you see that something is going on in the Board of Education that you don't approve of, they're taking out books, for example, that you wish were there, showing up as a citizen, showing up as a coworker, showing up in all kinds of ways, and standing for the things that you really believe in, having the courage to do that, is the only thing that allows democracies really to function. People have to have this kind of civic courage. Third area, third virtue, truthfulness. Boy, that's in trouble these days, right? The idea that we take the trouble to know what the truth is. If we hear something on social media or on the news and we're not 100% sure it's true or not, we don't spread it. We check it out. We look for different sources. We try to check the sources. We look at the credibility of the sources. That doesn't mean we're always going to be right, but we make an effort really to kind of tell what the truth is. And it's the same with ourselves. We can lie to ourselves about what we're about. And it's very important that we be truthful to ourselves. So for example, if we feel inside that we're gay or trans, for example, but want to deny it and say we're straight, that's a way of lying to ourselves. Or if we try not to notice things that are going on in our family that really are going on and pretend they're not happening. I mean, that's a way of lying to ourselves too. There are all kinds of ways that we can avoid the truth or lie about the truth. But the fact is that being truthful is one of the most important things you can do. You can't achieve your aims in life unless you're truthful about how you feel about things and what you really want. And you can't work together with other people unless they experience you as a truthful person. If people know you're a liar, nobody's going to want to go into business with you, and no one's going to want to marry you or anything else. You know how you feel about liars and people who are deceptive and cheaters and so forth. You don't want to be one of them. So I think honoring the truth is one of the most important things we can do. Fourth area, being fair. Okay, even little kids, 6 months old, have some sense of fairness. Okay, if they watch puppets, for example, and one puppet is being unfair to another puppet, they don't want to look at that puppet. They don't want that puppet. They want the good puppet. At age 2, if you see puppets, some of them are helping each other and some of them are hurting each other, kids will give rewards to the good puppets and take rewards candy away from bad puppets and so on. So even the youngest kids know that fairness is important. And one of the first things we learn to say as a kid is, that's not fair, right? When your brother or sister gets more than you got on something, gets a bigger slice of the cake, or you get punished for something you think you didn't do. It's one of the first words we learn. And the interesting thing is that society wouldn't function at all if it wasn't for fairness. Let me give you an example. Psychologists do a lot of research in what's called game theory, where they have people play games in which they can decide to just further their own benefit and screw everybody else, or they can try to be beneficial in a way that helps everybody playing the game. Okay, so they can just be in for themselves and be selfish, or they can be fair to everybody else in the game. And what you discover is if you put a bunch of people in a room and play this game, and play it over and over and over again, the same game. The first time you play it, everybody tries to be fair, okay, to everybody else. But eventually, somewhere along the line, someone's going to be selfish. And as soon as one or two selfish people get away with being selfish, then everyone becomes selfish. Okay, there's no longer any cooperation between anyone in the game. But if you give people the power to punish the selfish people by taking money away from them or calling them names, bad names or things like that, then all of a sudden trust is restored and the group flourishes again. So the lesson from this is that societies and groups can't function unless there's some basic sense of trust and fairness between the members. And that's one of the places where I think we're in great trouble today as a society, in that no matter what institution you look at, whether it's the courts or science or medicine or the press or the executive or the Congress, the Supreme Court, nobody trusts anymore that people are going to be fair. And when that happens, the whole society begins to decay. Okay, fifth virtue is something called temperance, which sounds awful. People remembered back in the 1800s, there was the women's Christians temperance movement. People drank too much, and Carrie Nation went around with an axe and chopped down broke up the taverns and stuff like that. Usually temperance means not drinking and so on. Temperance doesn't mean that. It was, for Plato, it was the most important virtue of all. It's the ability to see that if there are certain goals or ends that are really, really important to us, that we don't sabotage them by doing things that interfere with it. So for example, if we're diabetic like I am, and it's really important that we keep our blood sugar under control, that chocolate cake there looks really, really good, and I want to eat it, but My health matters more to me, so I'm not going to eat it. Okay, that's temperance. Denying yourself some short-term pleasure in order to get some long-term goal achieved. If I have a caring mutual relationship with another partner, okay, an exclusive sexual relationship and romantic relationship, I'm going to look around and there are other relationships that might attract me in one way or another, but I'm not going to pursue them because I want to safeguard this relationship that means more to me than anything else. And you can think of your own examples of goals that might be really important to you, and yet it might be easy to sabotage them. People sabotage them through drinking, through drugs, through gambling, through sexual morality, from getting addicted to video games. There are all kinds of things that you can succumb to that keep you from reaching your long-term goals. So temperance is the ability to keep your long-term goals in mind and remember to try to control your whims and desires so that you reach your long-term goals. Okay. The next virtue I want to talk about is equanimity, which is a sense that when life's ups and downs happen, you don't get unmoored by that. If people criticize you, you don't say, "Oh, my life is a disaster." If people give you reward, you don't say, "Boy, I'm the greatest person in the world." You keep your self-esteem stable through all kinds of ups and downs in life. So equanimity is to be able to have grace under pressure, to maintain your composure and your intellectual faculties in moments of hardship. So that's a really important virtue also. The next virtue I want to mention is conscientiousness. The idea that when something is important to us, we really apply ourselves seriously to it. We don't do a half-assed job. We don't turn it in just to turn it in, but we really, if it's important to us, really make sure that we do a good job. And we depend on people being conscientious. We depend on neurosurgeons doing their surgery conscientiously, air traffic controllers doing their work conscientiously, plumbers, electricians doing their work conscientiously. If you can't depend on people being conscientious, again, all of society falls apart. So that idea that if I have a job to do, I'm going to do my very best at it, and I'm going to pay attention to what I'm doing is very important. And sometimes that's hard to do. I look at nurses, for example, and one of the worst problems that happens in hospitals is that nurses go from room to room and bedside to bedside, and if they're not careful, they can carry germs from patient to patient to patient. So nurses have to remember, to wash their hands each time they enter a room, leave a room, and so forth, so that doesn't happen. And the same thing with surgeons, right? They have to wash their hands before they do surgery. They didn't used to do that. There was an Austrian physician by the name of Semmelweis who discovered that they had to wash their hands before they did surgery, and everyone laughed at him, But we know now that that's important. So nowadays, and at least in the hospital I'm familiar with, nurses wear a little badge, and every room has a dispenser with hand washing equipment. And if you walk in or out of the room without hand washing your hands, without pushing the dispenser button, the badge turns red. So it's a reminder to nurses, sometimes we need checklists and reminders to make sure we follow every step. I'm sure you've seen a launching of a rocket at Cape Canaveral or Houston or someplace like that, and how much they check everything over and over again, for an hour before they ever launch a rocket. So, that's conscientiousness. And the last thing I want to mention is something I mentioned right at the very beginning of this talk. I mentioned that Aristotle called his wise person a phronimos because they exercised what he called phronesis, or practical wisdom. And I want to say a word about practical wisdom, because all of these virtues are mediated by practical wisdom. Practical wisdom is, Aristotle said, knowing what to do, when to do it, with whom to do it, and how to do it in the right way so it gets done. He called it hitting the target, being able to hit the target precisely. If you want to change the world, if you want to change politics, if you want to change your neighborhood, if you want to change your family, if you want to do anything, you have to do it skillfully. There are all kinds of ways to do it badly. People just get mad at you. They don't want to cooperate with you. They drop out before the project is done. It takes a lot of interpersonal skill and wisdom to know how to do this in the right sort of way so that you actually reach your goals. And that means that you use all the kinds of rules of logic that the ancient Greeks talked about, to kind of make sure that you're thinking right about things. It means you understand that there are multiple factors affecting everything that goes on, and you have to take them all into account. It means you have to see things from other people's point of view. It means you have to see yourself as other people see you. If you don't know how other people think about you or react to you, there's no way you can be an effective person. It means knowing all kinds of interpersonal skills, how to apologize, how to negotiate, how to make your point clear, how to cooperate with other people, how to convince other people that that doing this will be a good thing for all of us. These are all skills that we learn, the kind of skills that a hostage negotiator has or a psychotherapist has. These are the skills we have to cultivate if we're going to really be able to work together collaboratively with other people and get accomplished what we want to accomplish. So I just wanted to lay all this out as these are the 8 universal virtues, the virtues that are true in every single culture, were true in the past and are true now and will be true tomorrow. And I have a lot of worries about how well we as a society cultivate these kinds of virtues. I mean, parents try as best they can, I suppose, to get their kids to tell the truth and to be kind and fair. I mean, I certainly had lessons about, from my parent about, oh no, that's not fair. You have to be fair, or well, I'm going to punish you worse because you told a lie. We get all this kind of training, and we read Aesop's fables, and we read all these children's books that tell us what morality is and so forth. But still, I think our society is doing a pretty bad job right now of teaching us what values really matter and what we really ought to be caring about. One of my biggest concerns, I'll just say this for a few seconds, is my concerns about the future of democracy. And for me, I'm following here a philosopher by the name of John Dewey, who was probably the most important American philosopher in the early part of the 20th century. And Dewey said democracy is more than just elections and free press and separation of powers and all the things we think about when we think about the mechanisms of democracy. He says it's really a spirit that lives within us, a caring that we want to flourish in our lives, we want our families to flourish, and we want as much as possible to create a society where everybody has the possibility of flourishing. He says if people carry that in their hearts, that we all want everyone to be everything that they can be in society and live flourishing lives, that's the inner meaning of democracy. And it seems we're getting further and further from that right now in the culture. And I think we're in big trouble because of that. And the real question is, how do you have a kind of a moral awakening again, so that people really begin to care once more truly about their neighbors' well-being and not just their own, and other families' well-being and not just their own, that they really care about creating a world that's safe for everyone, where everyone can have adequate health care, where everyone can have an adequate education, where everyone has the means to kind of realize their dreams as best they can. And I'm not saying complete equality or anything like that, because it's all right with me if, I have enough to live on and somebody else has $1 billion, as long as what I have to live on is enough that I can go to school or I can become the kind of person I want to be, that I have some free time to do the kinds of things I care about. As long as everybody can live that kind of life, I think that's good enough. I mean, there's never been a society that's been without stratification or where everyone was equal. And that's a utopia that we're never going to reach. But we at least have to have a society where it's right to say to each other, we care about each other, and we care about what happens to our neighbors, and we care about what happens to even people that aren't members of our group. Okay, and the more that we educate people to do that, I think the more that we've safeguarded democracy in a very important way. The other thing is that I want to go back to this idea of benevolence one more time. One of the hardest things we seem to be having as a society, sociologists use the word affective polarization, that we're getting to hate each other in this country along political lines. So if you look at the rate of intermarriage between Democrats and Republicans, it's now below 4%. Okay, all the marriages are below, only 4% are intermarriages. So you're more likely to marry somebody of another race at this point than you are somebody of another political party. And each side is convinced that the other side are demons. The Republicans call the Democrats demoncrats sometimes. But Democrats feel the same way about Republicans, that they're racists and bigots and selfish and so forth, xenophobic. And So the question is, how do you talk to people that see things in the world, understand the world totally differently than you do? And one of the things that John Dewey said is we have to extend some degree of benevolence to people on the other side when we talk to them. We don't have to agree with them. We don't have to. We don't have to force them to agree to us. But if we can have a conversation in which I can listen to you and hear why you believe what you believe, and why you feel the way you feel, and why you feel what you say is true, and then I can say it back to you. This is what I heard you say. Am I right? This is the way you said it. And they say, yep, you heard me. And then you can say to them, not here's why you're wrong, but here's why and how I see things differently. And let me explain it to you. If that dialogue can be continued in a friendly way, then there's hope that we don't see each other as demons or as enemies, but just people who have differences. And we'll always have different opinions on things. But I'm reminded of a story of, I can't remember the name of this big person, but of a person whose father was one of the heads of the Ku Klux Klan, and himself, he had a radio program in which he spread racist ideas. And he goes to college, and there he meets Black people and Jewish people, and he argues with them about his politics. And the interesting thing is that they don't isolate him or castigate him or consider him an enemy. They actually have conversations late into the night about these things, around dinner and so forth. And this goes on for a period of a couple of years. Okay, it's not just one day. And his views begin to change, not because he has a different ideology or he understands the world differently, but because he begins to care about these people. Okay, and he says, well, if I keep on saying the things I'm saying, I hurt them. And I don't want to hurt them because I like them. And then that begins his conversion to a whole different point of view. So I want to say that it's not arguments that change people's minds. If you're a liberal, you can't imagine a MAGA person coming up to you and saying facts to you that would change your mind. And it's the same the other way around. We can't change each other's minds, but we can learn to treat each other as human beings again. And I think that's the most crucial thing. It's hard to do. People say offensive things, and why would I want to treat them like a human being? But that's the only way through the muddle that we're in. I read an article a couple of years ago about how medical reps from medical companies, pharmaceutical companies, treat doctors. They want doctors to use their drug, right? If they go up to the doctor and say, use this drug, the doctor will say, no. But if they form a relationship with the doctor, they bring food for the staff, they remember the doctor's family and says, how's your kid doing? And they do this week in and week out, month out and month out, then eventually the doctor's willing to listen to them. And one other story like that, there was a project to work with children, newborn children in India who were dying at a high rate because they were dying of low body temperature. And all the nurses had to do to keep these kids alive was to bundle the baby with the mother and, bundle them together and have them be together. But their practice then was to separate mother and child and put the kid at risk. So they tried to tell people about this. And the nurses said, well, I've been a nurse for 50 years. You can't tell me what to do, right? But the way they finally changed their mind is they sent out a cadre of nurses to just team with these nurses, follow them around, become friends with them. And then after about a year of developing friendships, they then said, you might want to consider this. And then the nurses were willing to consider it. So again, what changes people is relationship, friendship, and caring, and not argumentation. And I think that's a very important thing for us to keep in mind as we try to make our way through what's going to be a very, very difficult period. And with that, why don't we open the floor for questions, comments, discussion, and whatever people want to bring up.
I actually have a question. I'm wondering if, Seth, I guess in your experience, is there a specific virtue that you think is harder to obtain or to carry than others, or is less common?
They're all hard. I haven't really thought about that. I mean, it's hard to always love other people. It's hard to always be truthful. It's hard to always keep your desires in check so you can reach your goals. I mean, they're all hard. And I think as you practice them over the course of a lifetime, some of them get easier some of the time in certain circumstances. It's, I can resist more and more of these temptations, but some other temptation will come up that will throw me for a loop. Confucius had a wonderful saying, which I wish I could remember the whole of it now, but he he talked about his 7 decades of his life and how he understood this project. And in each decade of his life, he understood it differently until he finally reached his seventh decade. And then he said, when I finally reached 70, my heart never wants to overstep the bounds of a virtue, But he did kind of trained himself and tamed himself. So his heart actually wanted to follow what his mind was telling him was the right thing. But it took 70 years for him. So I don't know. Is there one that you think is harder than the others?
I I'd say maybe truthfulness is something that I think a lot of people might struggle with, and not necessarily being truthful about big things most of the time, but really small things can just be very easy to lie about or to forget about or omit on purpose from conversations or just not completely reflect reality. And I think that's something that's become normalized. And I feel like it reminds me of the example you talked about earlier with fairness, where one person cheats at a game, another person does, everyone just starts doing it and it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's the case with truthfulness.
I think you're right. One of the things I do, I have a course that I've taught on these virtues for a Tricycle magazine, which is a Buddhist magazine. And one of the things we would do is a daily meditation on how truthful have I been today. Was there a time when I just tweaked the truth a little bit to make the story more interesting, or to make myself look a little bit better than I was in that moment, or to avoid some kind of disapproval from someone else that I really wanted to avoid? You can, and every day there are these little temptations that come up to just tweak things a little bit the other way to make yourself look a little bit more virtuous and better. And it's really something if you can sit down and review your day each day. You can take one virtue and work on it and say, how fair was I today, or how truthful was I today? And that's one way I recommend working on this as a kind of a self contemplation project. But yeah, I agree with you. It's very, very easy to get lost, and it's easy to get lost gradually, bit by bit. I read this wonderful article today. It was written 4 years ago by Anne Applebaum for the Atlantic magazine. But she was looking at people who lived in Stalinist Russia and in East Germany and in Hitler's Reich. And she was looking at who collaborated with the government and all the evil that was going on and who didn't, and what was the difference between these people. And she said the slope to collaborating for a lot of people was very, very easy. So she gives the example of an East German publisher. He has a little small publication house in East Germany when the communists are in power. And he's doing a decent job. He's a good person at heart. He's taking care of his family, And then the government says, well, every publication house, every printing press in East Germany has to register for a license from the government. Is he going to do it or not? Of course he's going to do it. He has to support his family. What's the harm in that? You're just licensing yourself. And again, the government says, we're going to give you certain jobs to do. We want you to publish the complete 20 volumes of the works of Joseph Stalin. Well, it's a book, it's in a library. Why? It's not, I don't think it's the greatest book in the world, but they're giving me a lot of money. I can publish it. It doesn't do any harm, right? And then after you do that, maybe a few months later, a friend comes by who's a bit of a dissident. He says, I'd like you to publish a book of mine that's critical of the government in some way. And you say, well, I don't know. That would put things at risk. I'm not going to do it. But it's a slow walk, step by step, into compliance with what the government demands. And he said that's the way a lot of people become collaborators. They don't set off intending to be that, but they're just protecting their interests and trying to do what's reasonable. What do we say? Go along to get along, right? And it just happens bit by bit until all of a sudden you're totally captive to a criminal system. So we're seeing the speed at which billionaires are rushing to kind of be at this inauguration. Okay, and it's the same thing happened when Hitler took power as chancellor. All the major manufacturers immediately began to cozy up to him, under the delusion that they could control him, that he would be their puppet. The same way that all the oligarchs in Russia today kind of cozied up to Putin, but it ends up Putin. If you're an oligarch who doesn't agree with Putin, you find yourself accidentally falling out a window, right? It just happens step by step and inch by inch, and so. The answer is just try to be as decent as you can in each moment. What does being decent mean right now? And try to do it. I read another study that was saying who ends up being dissidents in the Soviet Union and so forth. And the answer is people who can't live with a lie. People who just say, I just can't do this. I can't not write this poem. or I can't not create this painting, or I can't do this I can't turn in my friend to the secret police. And there's some point they reach where they just can't do it. And uh, we all are going to have to ask ourselves that question, I think, in the coming years. Where is that point for us where we say no, even though there's some risk involved? That whole dimension of courage that I talked about.
Ella, do you have a question?
Hi, thank you. Yes, I was thinking about, I think it's the is it temperance, what you're talking about now, about kind of just being understanding and kind to most people and listening to them. And how do you, I just have a question, like how do you, if you are trying to follow these things and you're putting all that positive energy out, and you're getting you have like a few people that are pretty adverse to that, or kind of like aggressive, or yeah, I'd say like aggressive to you. Like how do you not get taken advantage of, basically? How do you not let it, how do you not internalize it? Like how do you keep yourself, that energy going, when there are some people
What a wonderful question.
that
Um, so the first thing is that being nice to people doesn't mean being a doormat. Okay. When I talk about courage, one of the things that's most important in courage is setting boundaries. And so, I mean, there are some people you can talk to and you can convince them that what they're doing is not in their interest. If you keep acting this way, we're not going to be friends anymore. Or if we keep acting this way, this doesn't help you and it doesn't help me. There are ways you can talk to them about, or I really don't like what you're doing and I'm not going to be able to cooperate with you unless you change the way you're talking to me. But there are people that doesn't work with. There are narcissists and sociopaths and Machiavellians and all kinds of bad people in the world who really enjoy being bad, racketeers, narco terrorists. I mean, not everybody in the world is nice. Well, you can't have a relationship with those people. You can't convince them that they're wrong. So the best thing to do is to try to keep your distance once you decided that somebody's like that they're not amenable to conversation and discussion. You know, I think, for example, most MAGA people are people you can talk with. I mean, I know people who are pro-Trump who I can have very good discussions with. They read my book, they like my book, we remain friends. But I know other people, you know, and you can probably think of people in the public eye who are like this, who are not interested in the truth and are just interested in pushing their own agenda and gaining power over other people and dominance. And you can't have a relationship with that kind of person. You can only set boundaries and try to not have them in your lives as best as possible. I don't know if that answers your question or not, though. Maybe.
It does. It kind of makes me sad though, because like I think it's so great to be able to, like, agree to disagree, or for someone to see their flaws. I expect someone to go, oh well, now that I look at it that way. But then you get those people that don't, just become aggressive, like, excuse me, like, no, I'm right, you're wrong,
Yeah.
So is there like a go-to answer for that you
No,
suggest?
that just ends the discussion at that point. You're saying, well, a discussion isn't possible at this point. You
Got
know,
it.
maybe sometime in the future will be. You know, maybe you're not that kind of person all the way through to the core. But some people are that way all the way down to the core. You know, and you know that's why we have prisons. You know, there are bad people in the world. Let's acknowledge that. Not everybody is a good person. I just want to assume that most people have some degree of decency to them. Certainly most people I meet day by day on a day by day basis are basically decent in many ways.
Yeah. Thank you. Makes
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Ella.
McKenna?
Makina, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Hello, hello. I think first of all, this whole presentation, this whole discussion has been very, very insightful for me. One thing that really stuck out for me was the idea to just not necessarily get rid of fears, but to just try things that like make you fearful. Like for the example, like if you were scared of elevators, to like get out, like get into like the habit of like, keep on trying in order for like the fear to go away and stuff like that. And even as like a college student or business student, we've, always said if something scares you, then that's how you know it's working or something like that. But how do you like get over the fear of trying something, like if it's not negative, obviously, like trying something that like is positive, like I don't know, like um, to, I can't even think of one. Like, okay, being in like social settings, let's say, for example, you don't like being in social settings. Like, how do you get rid of like that fear? Or, like, get rid of fear of like just trying things that are new to you?
Ah, well,
That's
the first thing I think is don't try to get rid of the fear. Do it despite the fear. Okay. But I'll tell you, I mean, years ago, I knew this psychotherapist named Albert Ellis, who was the one who founded cognitive behavioral therapy back in the 1960s. And he used to say, he used to give people what he called shame exercises. Like, let's suppose you're afraid to go out. This is a terrible example, but he's one he used, so I'm going to use it. He was a very sexist guy, but he says, let's assume you're afraid to go out on the beach in a bikini because you think your body looks just awful and people are going to laugh at you. Okay. He would insist that they go out in the bikini, go on the beach and spend hours there just walking around in front of people. And he says, eventually you discover that nothing bad happens to you when you do that. I mean, people may have all kinds of thoughts about you, like, why is that person wearing that bathing suit and so on? But it doesn't harm you at all, you know? He got over his fear of dating that way. He used to be afraid to date, ask women for a date. He would throw up. He was so anxious. And what he did, which is probably very annoying to people, is he'd find a park bench in Central Park, and whenever a girl sat down next to him, he'd start talking to them. Right? He was terrified. And 9 out of 10 times, the girl just left the bench and walked the other way. They didn't want anything to do with him. But he learned that nothing bad happened to him when that happened. He got rejected over and over again, but he was still there, you know. So he eventually got over his fear. So I think that's the model that he was proposing. And I think it works pretty well for most kinds of problems. The fear's there, just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. Eventually it does get easier because you realize that the terrible things that you think are going to happen to you aren't going to happen. You know, you're going to survive it in some kind of way. You may not ever get to like it, but at least you can do it. And that's the way for a lot of people with public speaking. I couldn't have imagined doing this at age 20, you know, getting up before a group of people and droning on for hours until I fell asleep. It's a good job, though.
I'm going to ask one really, really quick question. Do you practice all those virtues? Do you have a practice for cultivating all those virtues in your own life?
It's probably not that much of an organized practice, but I do reflect on when I become aware that I failed to live up to it, and you know, one of them, and then I do make the intention to do better, you know, the next time. So definitely, that's a conscious part of my life. If somebody gets my goat, for example, and I really lose my temper with them or something like that, I begin to explore what was it about that interaction that hooked me and got me to lose my equanimity in the moment, and is there something I could have done so I could have stayed calm and cool and continue to pursue my goal, you know?
Do that during your meditation, or do you have a formal reflection practice, or you just...
Nowadays, I mean, I've gone through that kind of formal practice. So I've done it, for example, with my own Zen teacher, where for a couple of years we were on that in a formal way. But for me now, it's much more informal. But it'll come up, you know. I'm sitting there meditating, and I'll realize I didn't exactly tell the truth in that situation earlier today, or something like that, and I'll breathe with it, you know. I'll try not to hate myself for it, you know. And then you ask yourself, is that the kind of thing I need to make amends for? Do I need to straighten that situation out, or can I just promise not to do it again the next time? You know, you begin to kind of go through what all the possibilities are, and I'll do that pretty formally.
Thank you, Seth, so much for your wonderful presentation. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for inviting me, and it's lovely to meet all of you people. Good to see you.